logging in and dialing in, and so we'll gather more people as we go here, but we thought we should probably go ahead and get started. I'm Matt Leininger from the Deliberative Democracy Consortium. Welcome to this webinar about recruiting conversation participants, what we learned in Albuquerque and Sacramento. I'll say a little bit more about myself in a second and introduce the main presenters on today's webinar. And I'll say a little bit more about the logistics of how the webinar will work. But first, let's talk about just in general what we are going to be discussing today. We are going to be talking about, well, first I'll give a bit of an overview of the National Dialogue, but the meat of this, of course, will be about recruitment, figuring out your recruitment goals, developing your message, figuring out ways to reach particular populations you're trying to reach, other kinds of recruitment tips and techniques, and also ways you can make it as easy as possible for people to participate. So that's the main essence of what we'll be talking about here. And there are two presenters are people who have just done this with great success in Albuquerque and Sacramento. And of course, they had done this kind of work, I think, in many other contexts before that, which is one reason they were able to pull it off in the two lead sites. But they can give you a lot of the context about what they did that worked or didn't work in those two cities. So Elaine, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Elaine Mateo. I am the CEO of Everyday Impact Consulting. We're a consulting firm that works with a number of different foundations and philanthropic groups to help with strategic planning and project management, and we also work with nonprofits on a host of different types of projects. But for the purpose of the work with creating community solutions, I've had extensive experience in community work prior to my time with Everyday Impact Consulting. I served for about a decade at a community-based organization as an executive director. The organization was called Asian Resources Incorporated, and served many different ethnic groups, many different demographic groups, including formerly incarcerated. The staff spoke, read, and wrote 12 different languages. And so in terms of outreach program development, a lot of that foundation lended itself to the work that we now do with Everyday Impact Consulting, and certainly to the work that we did as part of the Creating Community Solutions outreach project. So that's me.
Awesome.
Happy to share. Mm-hmm.
Everett.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Everett Hill, a strategy management consultant in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I also, like Elaine, spent the last 20 years in the nonprofit sector, also working with schools, government entities, working through policy initiatives, and now work with foundations, schools, and nonprofits, helping them to design, develop, and implement strategies that help them meet their missions in much more efficient and effective ways. Utilizing many participatory strategies and participatory tools for not only dialogue, but for organizing and for connecting organizations to communities and individuals to activities. In this project in particular, we were able to utilize much of that to develop the strategies that helped us be successful here. So I'm appreciative to be able to be a part of this webinar today, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, so I'm Matt Leininger. I am the director of the Deliberative Democracy Consortium, which is an alliance of nonprofit organizations and academics who are all practicing or studying or advocating public deliberation and better public engagement in democracy. The fourth person on our team here, the kind of Wizard of Oz behind the scenes here, is Rebecca Reyes from Everyday Democracy. She is the one kind of actually changing the slides here and doing all the different logistical pieces of the webinar. So we're very happy to have her doing that and making the rest of us look good. The logistics of the webinar, any point through our, at any point in our conversation, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, And I know a lot of you people probably have your own experiences with recruitment and things that have done worked well or not worked well. So we certainly invite comments or contributions like that in addition to questions. So if you at any point want to do that, you can just raise your hand. You click the icon, the raise your hand icon at the top right. And the other way you can do it, you can also just type in a question that you have or a comment that you have into the little chat box on the kind of middle right of your screen. And if you type a question in, Rebecca may either kind of bring that up and read it off, or wait till the end of the slides and read them then. The other thing that is important to know is that these webinars are all being taped, actual videotaped, so that you can actually access both the slides. This is a PowerPoint presentation if you want them, or you can also play it, the whole webinar in its entirety, and get all the audio and everything. And that's obviously something that could be handy if you have other people, other colleagues who wanted to be here but couldn't. And that option has actually been quite popular on the Creating Community Solutions website. A bunch of these webinars have been now downloaded and viewed hundreds of times. So that's a good way of expanding the reach of this. So I think we're going to skip here ahead to the next one, which is, so we're doing a little overview here of the National Dialogue, which was launched by President Obama on June 3rd. And it was, of course, coming out of a concern that well, a long-standing concern, but one that was actually that increased through the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School last year, and clearly brought this important public issue to the forefront, and made a lot of people realize, including the president, including the administration, that this issue is something that communities really need to grapple with, that we need to kind of bring it out of the shadows and allow people to think about it and what they can do about it within their own lives and within their schools and communities and workplaces. So the essence then of it is to organize large numbers of events all over the country. And if you look at the main screen, if you go to creatingcommunitysolutions.org, you will see all the different pins in the map that people have put in, committing themselves to organizing something in that community, and the pins are different colors depending on whether the event has happened or not, but it gives you a good sense of kind of the scope of this so far. I think we're up to about 100 pins right now, and some of these projects, of course, or events have already happened. Some of the process in communities has started happening, and so some of those pins you can actually click on and see some of the results of what people said and what they're working on. There have been has been planning going on in 10 lead sites. The first two that actually took place early in the year are represented here in the call, Albuquerque and Sacramento. Another one just happened in Greater Kansas City. October 12th, I think, is Washington, D.C. So we have this kind of parade of lead sites, by which we mean large-scale events involving several hundred people, a really good demographic mix, lots of young people participating, and so on and so forth. And we'll hear more about that in the context of Albuquerque and Sacramento as Elaine and Everett speak. And then, of course, there's a wide variety of other events, including smaller discussions, online discussions that have been taking place on a platform called Civic Commons, and other kinds of things. So the goals of all of these, the goals of the project in general, first of all, basically to get, the first most basic one is to get people talking about mental health, to take this issue, which has been something that's been difficult for people to deal with or address openly, and bring it out of the shadows, get people to talk about it, break down some of the misperceptions that people have about it, give people some of the information that they would like to know about the issue, and just have good, productive conversation. The second goal has been to find and catalyze some community-based solutions so that people can be talking about what they can do, whether that's as individual volunteers, as members of organizations, at schools, at college campuses, all those different kinds of things that people belong to, and then also, in some cases, as part of these large-scale planning processes that are happening in Sacramento, Albuquerque, and a bunch of other cities. And that's the third goal is kind of that, more on that level of things, ways that are an array of organizations in the community, public sector, private sector, nonprofits, everybody can actually get together and decide, what can we do collectively to improve mental health in our community, particularly for young people. Now, of course, the scale, having the scale of Albuquerque and Sacramento, and doing the kind of recruitment that we're talking about in this webinar has a bunch of different benefits. Obviously, the more people you have, the more awareness you have of the issue, the more that you are able to build relationships among those people, between people of different generations, between people working in different organizations or in different sectors. Of course, the more people you have, the more ideas for action that you generate, and the more capacity you generate to actually implement those action ideas. And then, of course, the more that you can involve different populations, different kinds of people in the community, and people begin to understand the dynamics of some of the different kind of issues, race and religion and generation and gender, and how they impact the issue, that can be very rich learning as well. So, oh yes, okay, so here we have a quick rundown of what actually happens in the discussion groups. As you may know, we've got these discussion materials that we have developed with SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the Department of Health and Human Services, and the guides. The guide has a kind of a typical sequence for this kind of public engagement work, where it starts out getting people to talk about their experiences and why they care about this issue, then gets them thinking about some of the different challenges that they face in addressing the issue, some of the kind of main ways they might do something about the issue, and then in the final part of the discussion, getting them talking about more specifically about action, whether they were willing to do, what do they like to see happening in the community, those kinds of things. So each of the groups generally has 8 to 10 people, facilitators, some of the other kind of good process pieces that you see working in this kind of public engagement stuff. One other thing to say about it, however, is that in many communities, people have actually adapted the discussion materials, the information brief, as well as the guide, and we certainly welcome you doing that and adding some of your own local flavor to that. The format of most of these conversations, one of the key kind of decision points that people often come up against is this question of whether they're trying to organize something that is going to be a one-day event, or where they're going to have large numbers of people together on the same day going through a bunch of sessions, or whether that's going to be kind of parceled out into a number of sessions where people might be meeting only for an hour or two over several days or weeks in order to kind of go through the process together. And at this point, maybe I'll ask Elaine and Everett if you have other thoughts about this, because I think probably both of you have experience with both of these kinds of formats. And I know at least in Albuquerque, there's been both kind of taking place. So just curious about any sense you have of kind of the trade-offs involved in this kind of decision.
So this is Elaine, and in Sacramento we did a large one-day event, and what was really great about that particular format is that you get, we had several hundred people in a room, we had a tremendous amount of energy, a lot of attention, and it really built up momentum for now these action planning steps that are moving forward here in Sacramento. I think the challenge to that, though, is that it is only one day. So if you have folks who can't make it that day, who aren't available, they can't really participate in the same way, as opposed to, if you're having multiple conversations over several days or several weeks, people may be able to check in and add value that way. So, I think in Sacramento, it certainly worked for us, I think, as a big kickoff, and to frame what was, the beginning of this Creating Community Solutions initiative here in the region. But, again, the trade-off is that if folks aren't available that day, it's a little more difficult to kind of plug in and inject their data and their input into the overall framework.
And this is Everett. And so we experienced similar to what Elaine was talking about, in that, we had a really robust one-day, full-day event. We had over 300 attendees, and folks were really excited about the generative conversation that took place that day, and also excited about the possibility of continuing to have input into some of the solutions that were coming forward. So in Albuquerque, we actually designed the one-day event in such a way that it could feed continued conversation over the next 18 months. And so we're now in a process of designing smaller conversations to continue getting into neighborhoods and really beginning to have conversations about not only the outcomes that came out of the larger conversation, but getting into neighborhoods in the 4 quadrants of our city and some of the counties on the outskirts to really see how those outcomes can potentially impact those neighborhoods, kind of neighborhood by neighborhood. So we found it very beneficial to have a large kickoff event, but we also knew that it was going to be important for us to continue having those dialogues because, as Elaine said, there are some folks who were not able to get there. We had some late registrants and knew that we had more interest than we had space and time on that first day. So those subsequent dialogues have become really important to allow people to engage.
Terrific. And please do, as we go along, if people have questions or want to make comments, please do raise your hand. So the next slide we're looking at here has to do with the kind of the planning for recruitment, kind of who you're trying to involve, how many, how you're going to do it. So beginning with some initial questions, what people, which sets of people are perhaps most affected by an issue, which may be most important as far as moving action ideas forward, thinking strategically about some of those kinds of questions. What kind of overall scale do you need to kind of really make happen some of the things you're trying to do in your community? What are the barriers to various sets of people in terms of participating? And how can you actually reach out through the networks that will bring people to the table to actually do that effective kind of proactive kind of network-based recruitment? You guys have thoughts about at the kind of the planning stage here?
Sure. This is Everett.
Sure. This is Elaine, and I'll
Sorry,
a bit of a lag. That's okay.
Yeah,
Everett first and then Elaine.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, one of the first things that we did, and obviously we had the benefit of the target groups that were provided in terms of who we were looking for to have the conversation. One of the first things that we did in Albuquerque was to take each of our target groups, whether it was the youth group, the folks with lived experience, practitioners, family of folks who had a mental health circumstance, or the general population. We took each of those target groups individually, and we began to map what relationships in terms of assets that we had for each one of those target groups, represented by individuals, organizations, institutions, or formal and informal groups. And from that mapping, we began to attach contact people for each one of those represented assets. And that helped us both build our steering committee from those representative folks, but it also gave us our baseline group of networks that we were able to then utilize to target our recruitment.
Cool. Elaine?
Yeah, so in Sacramento, yeah, we worked, I think, similarly. Just to give you a little bit of a backdrop, we had a very tight time frame in Sacramento. So our recruitment goal was we're looking at 350 to 400 people in the room on July 20th, which is the day of our event. We began literally the day after the president did the big press conference on June 3rd because we had just over a month to do all of our outreach and recruitment. By the end, we had about just over 700 people register, and we had over 350 people in the room. We did meet the target of having 1/3 of those folks young people, and I'll talk more about that a little later in the webinar. But in terms of how we got there, so when we began, we really looked at who was going to be on the outreach team. We structured it very similar to kind of like a grassroots organizing operation. So we did a list of all of the demographic groups that we knew we wanted to make sure were in the room that day. And if you know anything at all about Sacramento, it's very diverse. It was actually named one of the most diverse cities in the country by Time magazine. So in terms of outreach, we really needed to look both at kind of race, ethnic diversity, but also by age. We wanted to make sure we had seniors. We wanted to make sure the LGBTQ community was also represented. So on the team, on the organizing team, we had representatives of various demographic groups, local community organizers, folks who represented like assembly member staffers, leaders of community-based organizations that serve Latino population, African American population, Asian and Pacific Islander population, and then we also had like a youth media team who was involved in the design of the outreach. So it was very intentional in terms of who was on that group. And then the other thing that happened is if folks couldn't participate because our outreach, our outreach strategy was really intense. We met weekly, in person, and via phone. If people weren't available to do that, they were added to our list. So there were a handful of community leaders or faith-based leaders who either myself or other folks on the team had one-on-ones with, and we met with. We talked to them about the importance of bringing community members to the event. And we just kept them on the list so they knew what was happening by way of organizing an outreach. And as we tailored the outreach to reach certain demographic groups midway through, they were aware of that as well. One important thing that I should mention, and you guys may come upon this as you're doing your outreach as well, in terms of what might keep some of these groups from participating. Well, a lot of folks, as we were going around and talking to them about this really great opportunity to be a part of this dialogue, they were a little challenged by, well, what is the follow-up? Because in Sacramento we did a big day-long event, they really wanted to understand how this would be different from other day-long events and other data-gathering kind of conversations. And so in Sacramento, what was really fantastic is the leadership of the City of Sacramento and the County of Sacramento, as well as several philanthropic groups, several foundations came together and have basically compiled some funding to support resources to support a one-year action plan. So that was really, I think, important in Sacramento to explain to folks that this is part of a much longer strategy, a much longer initiative, and the leadership here in Sacramento is committed to seeing things change around, how we are doing our mental health work, how we're working together. So, in terms of what kept some of those groups away, I think when we were able to articulate this is part of a longer strategy with additional resources and it's beginning versus, this is just a one-day event. It made the difference in getting their buy-in and getting them to outreach and bring groups to the table.
Awesome. So the next slide focuses a little bit more specifically on kind of message and the pitch that you are giving to people about why they should participate in this. And of course, a couple of things that are generally tricky in this kind of work. One is that it's going to be up to the participants themselves what ends up being in the plan or what they end up working on. So it's sometimes difficult to say, here's what the outcomes are going to be, when it's up to those participants what the outcomes are going to be. So I'm curious about how you guys have handled that in your two cities. And then, of course, also the challenge of making sure that you've got a message that you can tailor to different audiences, because people are going to have different reasons for coming based on whether they are a mental health provider or a young person or a parent or a school administrator or so on and so forth. So if you could talk about the way you've handled both of those that you've done as far as developing your recruitment message. Either one of you.
Yeah, this is Elaine. So to your first question, Matt, about how do you get them to come to the table, messaging and getting them to participate, to come to the event, is to really, I think, make clear for them that it really is a blank slate, that there really is an opportunity through the dialogue to develop some data and to produce some data that inevitably will be used to make some either policy changes or to make some systems change or shift, in the region around mental health. And so I think we were clear about that, really nothing's been decided. This is an opportunity for the community at large to kind of paint the canvas. And again, as I said before, the other message that we shared is there are resources involved. If we can craft a very strong plan based on the data that comes out of this event, there's an opportunity to make real change. And I think people really sunk their teeth into that. In terms of messaging, so we had to really tailor the message to many different communities. So for example, in the youth community, they designed their own flyer. They had their own, their tweets and their Facebook posts were all their own. They developed a series of video vignettes to talk about what it meant to be a part of this as a young person in Sacramento. So, the message was all their own, and I think it really helped in connecting kind of youth to youth. Into the other monolingual communities, so we did outreach in several monolingual communities in Sacramento. Spanish community, Hmong, Vietnamese, Russian, and Chinese. And their flyer was actually tailored toward, that particular community. So whereas in the English-speaking community, we talked more broadly about the event and President Obama's action, and we talked more about mental health. In those flyers, in the monolingual communities, we asked questions like, do you ever get very sad? Do you ever get very angry? Because the translation, the direct translation of some of those terms didn't, some of the terms in the English flyer didn't directly translate, or there was no word or concept for those particular languages. So we really had to refine. So in terms of messaging, we had anywhere between 5 to 7 different tailored messages, kind of all with the same goal of sharing this opportunity to be a part of this Creating Community Solutions event and to give feedback and to be a participant. But it was definitely tailored towards very unique communities, and we let the communities define what that messaging would be.
Awesome. Everett, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, in Albuquerque, as Elaine kind of alluded to earlier, we had literally 6 weeks to pull our event together. And so as we developed our project management matrices with all of our strategic objectives, our actions, input, and resources needed, who was going to lead on that, and our time frames, as we met weekly to update ourselves on our recruitment efforts, we were really intentional not only about how we had structured our steering committees to be as inclusive as possible. We also knew that with our tribal demographics in New Mexico and multi-ethnic communities, in addition to the deaf and hard of hearing community, that we wanted to make sure we included in our process. As we developed messages, we wanted to make sure first that we were conscious of saying that this effort was an incredible opportunity between the City of Albuquerque, the Mayor's Office, Everyday Democracy as a national partner, and the White House, that we were building on a conversation that had already started in New Mexico. That there had been some work before around mental health. There had been lots of organizations and individuals who had been a part of discussions before, and we wanted to make sure that we honored their input and their work beforehand, and we began to develop messages based on the honoring of that work that had come before. And I think it allowed us to tailor messages for specific communities in ways that let people know that we were not only trying to be intentional about this conversation, but we also wanted to be respectful. And we spent quite a bit of time making sure that we talk to individuals and to professionals in the mental health community, make sure that we were maintaining, that all of our strategies for our dialogue were also maintaining levels of confidentiality and creating a space for people to feel like they could share information during the dialogue. The other thing we were really conscious of is not only developing the message, but who the messengers were. And in some groups, you know, as Elaine was saying, for our youth outreach, we used a cadre of young people. We actually recruited 70 facilitators for our dialogue, and half of them were young people. And so we had young folks who were not only working as facilitators, but also helping us to recruit other young folks. We were able to do that with many of our groups. The deaf and hard of hearing community was able to reach out into their community specifically as well. And we were able to get some of that support as well in tribal and the practitioner community. So we were trying to be conscious of not only our message, but making sure that we were putting forth the right messengers as well. Last thing I'll say is, as we moved from week to week, getting closer to our dialogue, if we realized that we had met one of our target areas, we would then ask the group who was focused on that one to redeploy their efforts to an area where we still needed help with recruitment. And so if we hit our general population numbers very quickly, we asked the folks working on that to redeploy themselves to work on you know, the youth recruitment area. So we tried to make sure we were utilizing as much of our capacity as we could in the areas that we needed it most.
Cool. Well, the next slide gets us, it's a little bit more quantitative here. It basically is kind of taking us through kind of the steps of, okay, what's our target number that we want, how many, to get that target, remember, how many do we need to get to sign up, how many are going to be interested in it, how many of those kind of people do we need to get the sign-up goal, and then how many people do we need to reach in order to get the number that is interested. So obviously this kind of little schematic might differ from place to place and issue to issue, and obviously in different places you have a different total number that you're looking for, and in both Sacramento and Albuquerque you guys were looking for several hundred people, not just 15. But I just kind of wonder whether whether this type of thinking about kind of, all right, if we have this number, how many do we need to reach in order to get them? Is that something that you've used, or do you think this is, what kind of variations might there be on this kind of way of thinking about it?
Well, Matt, this is Elaine, and in Sacramento, again, the goal was to get anywhere between 350 to 400 people in the room for the July 20th event. We monitored our registration numbers. I mean, as we were getting closer, that last couple of weeks, we were monitoring every day because, as Everett had mentioned, you want to shift your outreach strategy to make sure you're getting the right demographic. Well, I want to say about, we were about 2 weeks out or a week and a half out, and our registration numbers were climbing. And so in Sacramento, America Speaks was actually the project management team who was kind of helping us figure out, you know, in terms of demo numbers, what we would need to do and shift. And I was on a call with them, and I was getting a little antsy because I was a little fearful that with, you know, 550, 600 people registered, that we may not have enough room, and do we have a plan? And as it turned out, you know, we were right on the money in terms of registrants with 350 people. So my best advice, if you guys are monitoring numbers, people are registering, is keep registering them. Because we were a little anxious because we saw those numbers climbing on registration, but at the end of the day, we hit the number. We probably could have had several more, but we did hit the goal. So the best advice I can give is just keep getting them registered, and then, you know, best case scenario is you need a larger room, you've got more people for the discussion, and I think that's a good problem to have. But I think we were, you know, we were very conscious of, you know, making sure that we had enough space for the folks, but just keep registering them. That's the best advice I can give in terms of the numbers game.
Right.
Yeah, and for us, we did something similar. We actually, because we knew we would have another 18 to 24 months of dialogue in conjunction with action planning, we actually, in each group, would over-enroll just a little bit to make sure that we had the numbers we needed for the large dialogue. But we were actually really fortunate, one, to be working with Everyday Democracy, its communications team, and their infrastructure folks, and some other contractors here who helped us develop a primary and secondary registration process, in that we were able to add our participants primarily for the large day event, but we were able to create a registration infrastructure online that once one of our groups, our target groups, was fulfilled, the registration process would actually roll over and ask anyone who was registering. It would let them know that the dialogue for July 20th has closed, but there's an opportunity for you to connect to the conversation in the coming months in any one of these areas where dialogues will be held. And so folks could, because our venue would only hold the 300 or so folks that we had, and so we wanted to make sure that we got a jump on recruitment for our subsequent dialogues, and we were able to build a registration infrastructure to do that.
Terrific. I've noticed we're 44 minutes in, which is, and there's an amazing amount of richness here. We have about 5, 6 slides to go, so we may need to accelerate a little bit in the last little bit here. The next one is talking about various different kind of ways to reach out to potential participants, and I don't know, and this is a fairly straightforward list of face-to-face conversations, phone calls, presentations, traditional media, social media, pilot dialogue, sample conversations. Any other ones that you guys would add to this list, or anything that you want to pick out to say about one or more of these?
Yeah, this is Elaine, and so I'll mention one other thing about the youth outreach. I think I'd mentioned before that they utilize social media to recruit the young people who came on the 20th. One exercise that they kind of pulled together was they had a list of Facebook posts and tweets that they approved by the executive, and these Facebook posts and tweets.
Elaine, we're losing you here. You're breaking up a bit. I don't know if you're farther away from the computer or something, but we're having trouble hearing you all of a sudden. Oop, maybe we lost.
Hello?
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So
okay.
what I was saying is that the young people developed a series of Facebook posts and tweets that they would post, by whichever weekday, and we just approved it all, with the front end of June, and then those things kicked off, so we didn't have to worry about those. The other thing that I'll mention is in terms of like senior demographics, we weren't as focused on traditional media, but what we found is when our numbers were really low on 65 and under, we ran a couple of newspaper ads, and those numbers shot through the roof, and we were fielding a ton of phone calls of people who wanted to register. So I would say don't count traditional media out. As you're looking at social media and some of these other technologically savvy ways of doing outreach, because that particular demographic was that was the way in which they heard about the event and the way in which they got to us to register.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think we utilized much of this, but we had committed ourselves very early on to a high-touch, grassroots, a network-driven recruitment strategy. And so although we utilized some of social media and some flyers and so forth, we actually didn't do any ads. We didn't want to do ads necessarily. The mayor here did do a press conference a few days before the event, but we got a lot of feedback from our practitioner community that for us to have a really rich dialogue, participants had to feel secure in the fact that they were in an environment that provided them a level of trust to have a robust conversation. And because we were getting that advice, we felt like people in a relationship was going to yield the best participant pool for us. And so we really focused much more there than using print media or television ads or anything, but we did do quite a bit with social media.
Cool. Well, the next slide kind of zeroes in on three particular sets of people who we're often trying to kind of recruit, in particular for mental health kinds of things. Youth, people who have lived experience of mental health and mental illness, and then culturally and economically diverse groups. And there's some basic things that are on the slide already. I won't bother reading them. But do you guys have extra things that you want to say about what worked with these three populations?
This is Everett. For us, I think this captures it well. We've had an opportunity, I have, to speak to some of this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the things that are on the slide, you mean? Yeah. Okay. Elaine, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so another cool thing that we did about 2 weeks out from the event is we were saying we needed to boost up those youth numbers, is we actually got a former Raider NFL player to come out and speak to some youth groups. So we took him around. He went to some after-school programs, and then the youth media team actually did a video vignette with him. So that was kind of cool. We shared that online for recruitment. I would say for culturally and economically diverse groups, and I think this, we've said this before, but really seeking out their leaders, and then what ended up happening is those leaders came with those particular groups, and we helped either underwrite their transportation, or they came as a group on a bus, and that was a really great way for them to feel comfortable in participating and fully participating on the day of. So, those are some additional things that we did here in Sacramento.
Cool. The next slide is a nice list of kind of creative ways of reaching people where they are, which is obviously one of the key things with recruitment. We keep saying over and over again is find out where people are gathering, what networks are they already belonging to, and so we've got a bunch of some interesting examples here. Again, I won't read them, but do you guys have others that you would put on this list?
Yeah, so the last 2 weeks we were pounding the pavement in Sacramento. We were hitting up a bunch of foster youth organizations. We were talking with a number of churches and community centers, but it was literally like feet on the ground. And as Everett said, talking with people who had relationship and making sure they were making that face-to-face contact, delivering the flyer even if they've already spoken to them, but going out and seeing them in person, it really made the difference for us in Sacramento.
Cool.
Yeah, and for us, we just kept doing an assessment, doing our own kind of internal assessment about where the centers of gravity were in and around the city, where people convene. Even some of the places that we visited in week one, that we had identified as a center of gravity in a particular neighborhood or community may have shifted given the a month or so that had passed and other things that were going on in the community. So just our ability to continually kind of assess for where the centers of gravity are and then try to get to them, much like the slide says, trying to meet folks where they are, but us continually understanding where folks are so that we could meet them there right up to the event.
Cool. The next slide has a few, let's see, a few more kind of social media and kind of or media-based ways of going where the community is. And these examples actually come from not from Sacramento or Albuquerque, but from a big project in Austin, Imagine Austin, over the last couple of years. Any others that in this category of kind of using social media, using other kinds of more creative or newer media to reach people? Anything else you might add to this list? If not, that's fine. We've already, I think, named a number of them as we've gone here. So why don't we go ahead to this next slide, and which deals with, once you've kind of been successful at kind of describing the opportunity to people and people are excited about it, obviously the other thing is removing whatever barriers that might be in the way of them actually being able to participate. Any thoughts about what you've done in Albuquerque and Sacramento, either some of the kinds of things listed here or something else that was helpful as far as getting people, removing some of these barriers for people?
Well, in Albuquerque, we tried to make sure that we created redundancy in this particular logistics conversation, that people had an opportunity in an outreach conversation with members of the steering committee or other folks who are helping to recruit for us to learn some of this, and then in the online registration process, and they could also register by phone or by fax. And we tried to make sure that we created at least tertiary levels of redundancy around this question so that we could make sure we had these areas covered. We had child care provided on site by one of the member groups, and we just tried to make sure that we were really aware of the needs with as much lead time as possible, so that we could support that.
Terrific. Well, we're getting close to the end of the time here, and I think the next slide requests questions. And again, if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, you can just click that button, or you can just type your question in to the little chat box there, and Rebecca will read it aloud. And Rebecca, please obviously interrupt us if you get either of those things. And one reminder, while I'm giving you a chance to do that, this whole thing is, as you see, as I said before, the slides are going to be available on the Creating Community Solutions website, and of course the whole thing has also been recorded so that people can actually watch the whole thing, and so feel free to be forwarding the link to that, which will be produced in the next day or so usually, to other people you think might be interested, or other colleagues you know weren't able to come today, those kinds of things. So, I think Elaine typed into the box. Elaine got disconnected from the call, so she's trying to come back on. But Everett, then, any final thoughts from you before we sign off here in a minute?
Sure. I'd just like to say, I think for us, we were really fortunate to have a lot of not only committed folks to the general work of participatory conversations, kind of participatory finding solutions to issues, but we were really fortunate to pull together a steering committee that was committed to the issue of mental health, issues of mental health, and had great networks that they were able to tap to help us really carry out a high-touch strategy. In addition to that, we had great partners here between the White House, the Mayor's Office, national partners in Everyday Democracy, and so many local partners that allowed us to, we got our venue for free. We were able to put our tables and chairs in that area at no cost, and so we were, it still was a resource-intensive activity for us, but we were able to leverage many assets and many committed individuals to make that event itself a success, and counting on those same types of ability to engage folks as we move through the next 18 or 24 months of conversation as the work continues in Albuquerque.
Terrific. I think we have a question.
Yes, we have one question from Martha. Martha, I'm going to unmute you so you can go ahead and ask it out loud.
Hi, Martha.
She is unmuted.
She perhaps is self-muted.
Yes, perhaps. Okay, well, she typed it into the chat box, so I'll just read it out loud, but this is from Martha. Are people doing outreach, are the people who are doing the outreach, are they paid staff, are they volunteers, or a combination of both? And does it make a difference?
Good question. Everett?
So for us, we really had a mix of folks working in project management capacities who were paid. We also had some contractors who helped with the setup of some of that. I talked about the redundancy that we built in some of our application and registration processes. Where we needed that kind of paid expertise, we were fortunate enough to be able to tap into it. But the vast majority of the work was done by volunteers on the steering committee and our partner groups. We were able to attract some funding from local foundations and from our national partners. So it was a mix of both. And I think as we continue forward, we're still looking at creating a balance between what's necessary to make the work possible.
This is Elaine. I apologize. I was having some technical difficulties a little bit ago. But in answer to your question, we hired one organizer and we paid out our youth. We contracted a youth media team, and there were about 4 young people who received some stipends. But the rest of the outreach was volunteer, and kind of similar to what Everett said, it was most of the work and the outreach and the organizing was done by folks who had relationship with people in the community and had great networks and who cared about the issue. And that was how they got brought to the table, and that's how they were able to help with the outreach efforts.
Excellent. Yeah, it does seem like the kind of the mix is always really good, and then I think that also then tends to raise questions about how to sustain that. Especially whether you're talking about kind of the enthusiasm of the volunteers or the money that you're paying to recruiters, and I think that's always kind of a question that always comes up with, particularly with successful public engagement efforts, is how do we kind of make this more than a temporary thing? So that, however, is a kind of question for another webinar. So let's not launch into that one. Let me instead thank you both, Elaine and Everett, not only for your time today, but also, of course, the tremendous work and commitment that you showed in those 2 cities to bring a whole bunch of people to the table to make some impact on a really critical issue. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, okay. As you can all see, our contact information is here both for me and for both Everett and Elaine. And of course, the Creating Community Solutions website is a great resource for all kinds of things, including the slides from today. So please don't hesitate to make use of that. One other person who you may want to contact if you haven't already is Sue McCormick, who is our community liaison for Creating Community Solutions. And she is someone who's been terrific at answering questions, finding resources, finding allies for people. So don't hesitate to call her or email her. Her contact information is also on the website if you are trying to make something happen in your community as part of this whole project. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca, also for making this happen. And have a terrific week.